South Hills Church, back in 2022, the month of October, I stood up in front of you and shared what was the remaining gap for the month of October, November, and December. And the number I shared was $2,004,000. And we did so many things through the next 3 months. In the month of October, we did a 90-day challenge, and we stood up in front of you and asked you to test God and trust Him with tithing, 10% of your income. For the end of the month of November, we taught the series called The Blessed Life. In the week, we did a deeper dive into a midweek study of the blessed life and how ultimately God transforms hearts. Then we started praying about what it would look like to give above and beyond our tithe. And many of you stepped up and joined me and my family in giving that $2,500. So God blessed so many of us in that journey. The stories just continued to come in as how God was transforming hearts. So today I stand in front of you. In 3 months, we brought the gap down from $2 million to $52,716.38. And I just want to pause and say, I am so proud of you, church. You reached out and you trusted God. You allowed God to speak to your heart. You stepped out in faith. And I just want to share a little bit of some changes that our financial team is making as we now enter into 2023. Previously, we've always done a calendar budget year. What that means is our budget year starts in January and it ends in December. But moving forward, we're going to transfer to a fiscal budget year, which means our budget year will start July 1st and we'll go through a fiscal year, meaning it will end June 30th. In the past, as we have done a calendar budget year, our budget year ends in December, and when we have a gap, we have to start freezing finances and we have to reduce expenses. And we normally have so many great things planned in the month of December for Christmas. And so what we'd like to do is make sure that we're being as wise as possible with being able to do ministry and not cut ministry short. And we only get to do that because of you and because when we step out in faith and trust God with every aspect of our life, God uses us to transform hearts and lives through the power of the local church.
Does it seem like other people have all these close connections? But every time you put yourself out there, you just end up getting hurt? Ever wonder if you're picking the wrong people? Or if there's something really wrong with you? Maybe the smart move is to keep everyone at a safe distance, including God. Is it possible for you to feel confident, connected, and comfortable inside a real relationship?
So our oldest son, his name's Jaron. He's been home. Many of you guys know him. He's been home the last month or so for Christmas from college, and it's always interesting when you have older kids and they're and you have multiple vehicles that you're paying for and insuring and all that stuff. And he drove home and had all kinds of car issues. So we kind of spent the entire time dealing with his car. And so he was driving my wife's car a lot while he was here. And a couple days ago, before he left, we heard the garage go up and he was pulling in, and all of a sudden we heard a crash. And so I was just like, oh, dear God. And so went running out there, and thankfully, he had just hit a bed that was being stored in the garage, and but it made a huge amount of noise. It was like one of those things where it sounded way worse than it ultimately ended up being, and no damage to the car, and no damage to the house, and no insurance claims needing to be filed. But have you ever done that though, where you're driving along, or you're pulling in somewhere, or you're operating your car, and you misjudge the distance between where you are and what you need to do? Last night we were downtown for the Steelheads game. It was a fantastic game. It was the most fights I've seen at any one game. It was fantastic. And so we're pulling into the garage, and I come around, and there's a couple cars waiting on this other car that's backing out, and they're kind of inching out, and then all of a sudden, for some reason, he kind of guns it and just right into the truck that was parked on the other side. And so I was like, oh, this is going to take a while. So I backed up and just parked in another spot. And then, sure enough, it didn't take a while because that guy just drove away. He didn't get out and do anything. But have you ever done that? Not where you drove away, but where you misjudged the distance, right? We've all had those moments, right, where you thought you had enough space, you thought you had the distance right for everything to kind of work out, and all the personal property and all the people to be safe. but you miscalculated it, you misjudged it, or maybe somebody else did, and it ended up being a smashed mailbox. I moonlight as a pizza delivery guy. I work for Domino's a few nights a week, and I started doing that once COVID hit, because we moved here like 2 months after we moved here. Didn't know anybody, didn't know our way around, and then COVID happened, and so I was like, man, I don't even know how to get any place, and how are we going to meet people? So I started delivering pizzas, and now it's just like the momentum of delivering pizzas. But my very first night after they let me go, I was delivering to this person. I pulled onto this street, and then I overshot their house, so I started backing up. And looking in the back, and somehow even with a backup camera, I backed into this mailbox, and it was bolted to the cement, and I knocked it over, and I was like, oh my gosh. So I got out, and only the mailbox for the person wasn't their house that was down there, and I was just like, I could drive away like the guy, but I didn't. I went down there, knocked on the guy's house, and he kind of freaked out, and I ended up, I can't fix anything. The way I fix stuff is I have a universal tool. I pull this out of and I Google, and I say, hi, yeah, I did this. Can you come fix it for me? And so that's what I did. I called somebody from our church, and they helped us fix it. But sometimes it's not just a smashed mailbox, right? Sometimes it's worse. It's a crashed car. It's an insurance claim. It's an injury or two. But have you ever done that with people and in relationships? Because we're always all taking in information about all the people around us, especially those who are close to us, right? And we're making assessments and evaluating circumstances and reading and reacting to them and what they're doing, and trying to put ourselves and the relationship in the best position that we can without crashing into each other and everybody getting hurt. Well, and as it turns out, we don't just have these physical blind spots when we're driving, we actually have emotional and relational blind spots too. Maybe you know exactly what I'm talking about. Now, you might not have given it very much thought, but we all have a particular way that we go about making and keeping connections with other people. And that's really kind of the premise for this series. Because the way that you go about making and keeping connections with other people is known as your attachment style. And there's 4 attachment styles. We talked about this last week. If you weren't here, it's kind of sort of sets the stage. If you sort of feel like, wow, what is this about and where's this going? I encourage you to go find the podcast. You can find it anywhere where podcasts are. Go listen to last week. It'll make a lot more sense. But there's 4 attachment styles. There's the secure attachment, there's sensitive, there's shut down, and scattered. And most of us, in fact, almost all of us, fall somewhere in one of those last 3 categories, right? Where we're either sensitive, we're shut down, or we're scattered. Now, as you might imagine, our parents and our families of origin, they play a giant role in the attachment style that we ultimately adopt. But they're only one part of it, because what research has shown is that your adult attachment style and my adult attachment style are actually the result of 3 different things. The result of biology, which is your temperament and your brain chemistry and your personality and all that stuff, right? But then there's your upbringing, there's your parents and the earliest relationships of your life and what your family of origin was like, but also your previous friendships and your previous relationships, what you experienced in those as you were going through junior high and high school and into college and adulthood. Like, what was the result of those relationships? So because there's more than just one thing, maybe we could all cut our parents a little bit of slack. Like they did what they did, but they aren't solely responsible for how you turned out or how your life turned out or all the ways that you crazy, right? Like some of that you did on your own. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Like they're a particular brand of crazy, but they blame it all on somebody else. And you're just like, I think that some of that is you. It's kind of mixed in there. Right? Now, why would we talk about any of this at church? Well, for starters, you're a whole person. God made and loves all of you, not just part of you, not just your soul, not just your spirit. And so that's why at our church, we don't just talk about like super churchy, like the spiritual stuff here, but about all of your life, because the truth is we believe if it pertains to you, any part of you, it's spiritual because God made you and you're a spiritual being. And the truth is like emotional health and spiritual health are inseparable. We try to always kind of separate our lives into different segments, but you can't. Right? You cannot be spiritually healthy and remain emotionally unhealthy indefinitely. Eventually, all of that emotional chaos will take its toll on your faith and begin to weigh you down and weigh down your relationship with God because they're connected. One influences and impacts the other, which brings us back to the idea of attachment. See, the point of this series is really to help you and to help me kind of figure out what is our default attachment style, because in the end, how we attach to one another, how we attach in relationships, the things that we do to establish and keep connections with other people, how we attach to other people is how we attach to God. So if you were not here last week, we gave out these little half sheets assessments, and you didn't get one. We have lots and lots of those. And so you can grab them at the Connect counter and take one this week, and you can have how crazy you are confirmed in a little short little assessment, right? But in this series, we want to discover how to move, not just from, like, we don't want to just find out what we are, but how do we move from where we are to a healthier, more secure connection in our relationship with God and with the people that we love. Because that's the good news this morning is, like, no matter what you've experienced, no matter what your family of origin was like, no matter what your faith experience is like, no matter what bad experiences you had at church, no matter what you've done, no matter what you're wired like, no matter what you experienced in relationships as you were growing up, like, we're not stuck. We can actually grow and get healthier and move forward. And by the way, when you take that assessment, just know that very, very few of us fit really nice and neatly into a single category, no matter what it is we're talking about, including this, because I took it, and I'm going to tell you what attachment style I am in a second, but as I'm reading about all this, I'm like, I think I'm that one. And then I read about the next one, I'm like, no, I'm pretty sure I'm that one. And then I read that one, I'm like, I think I'm that. I think I'm all of these. I think I'm, like, somehow scored the triple play. Like, I'm all of them. Now, the quiz, I encourage you to take it, the assessment, it's only meant to be a starting point. Honestly, probably most of us are a combination of one of the styles, one or two of the styles. There's a spectrum. Not all the stuff that's true of one style is going to be true of you because you're a person, right? You're not a category. You're not a research subject. So I did take the assessment this last week, and my spiritual attachment style came back as the sensitive one. I know, that just makes sense because I'm so sensitive. Those of you guys that know me, I know you're just like, he is sensitive. The other word for that is anxious, right? So today you get to kind of peek inside my brain a little bit and see a little bit of my neurosis, because we're going to talk about what that looks like in our relationship with God. Like I don't know, to maybe set it up. Have you ever been in a group text, and group texts get a lot of hate sort of out there, but I don't mind them. But have you ever been in a group text and everybody's kind of talking and joking, and people are, texting things and responding to each other, and so you're just like, oh, I'm going to jump in, and so you jump in, but as soon as you say something, like, everybody else goes silent and stops talking, and you're just like, what? Like, what just happened, right? And so, like, at first you sort of brush it off. Oh, it's just coincidental. Maybe they didn't see it, right? Because all these people are busy. So you wait a couple of minutes, still nothing. So you fire off another text to the group, and then another. And this time you make a joke, still crickets. And you're just like, what the heck? Everybody was just talking. I mean, it was a dad joke, and it wasn't that funny, but still, it was a pretty good dad joke. Nothing. Then all of a sudden, out of the blue, it starts back up. Nobody addresses any of the texts you sent. All right, so you send another one. This time you actually, like, say something directly to somebody. You use their name. They keep texting but don't really respond to what you said. And so you start now you're just like, oh my gosh, what is happening? So you start running all these scenarios in your head, and you're spinning all these stories as to why are these people ignoring me? And none of the stories and scenarios that you're running through your head are really very innocent or super fun or cheery, right? None of them are about how awesome you are, and they're just intimidated about how awesome you are or how much they love you, and they just don't know how to tell you. Like, those are not the things that run through your head. Like, you just start going, man, did I do something? You start replaying every interaction you've had with every single person in that text thread. Like, well, what happened? Like, I can't know from, I don't think did I do something? I don't think I did. I'm pretty sure I didn't. And then that makes it worse, right? Because you're just like, oh, what, like, am I even supposed to be, should I even be on this text thread? Do they even want me on this? Do these people even like me? Right? So yeah, that is a little bit of how the sensitive attachment sort of works. Only if it's left unchecked, it kind of works like that in response to everything. Like, if you've ever been around or in a relationship with someone who has a highly sensitive attachment style, there are times where it can feel exhausting. And it is, but especially for the person who's constantly running all those scenarios in their head, right? And obviously there's more to it, but the essence of a sensitive attachment is this. It's the belief that closeness in a relationship is the result of right behavior, right? And so you spend all your time in your relationships kind of constantly monitoring other people's moods and their behaviors and their responses to things so that you can adjust your responses and what you're doing accordingly. And so to keep people close to, like, we quietly people please, we struggle to tell people no, right? We look for the possible hidden meanings in the things that they say and do, right? We ascribe like motive. We live in fear that we're going to screw things up. We're always searching for proof that things are okay between us and the other person when we're in a relationship. And honestly, like when you start talking about those things and you say them out loud, like when I'm talking about them, they feel a little bit like drawbacks, and some of those things actually are. But sensitive attachment also gives us access to things that other people don't have, like the ability to read people. Like if you have a sensitive or anxious attachment style, you can walk into a room and read the room like nobody's business. You can read how people are feeling and what they're thinking and how something lands in a room like other people cannot. Because you're constantly paying attention to what people are doing and what they like and don't like, you can map other people's patterns and their habits, right? You can anticipate and troubleshoot potential situational conflict way better than people who don't have this attachment style. So there's a story in the Old Testament that I think kind of illustrates what this sensitive attachment style kind of looks like. And one of the things that I love about the scriptures is that it tells the stories of real people. It doesn't spin the flaws and the weaknesses of the heroes in the story. And so in this particular moment in history, there was a famine in the nation of Israel. And there's this guy, his name was Elimelech, and he had a wife named Naomi. And they take their two sons, and because of the famine, they leave Israel, they leave Judah, and they move to a country called Moab. And their boys grow up and they marry girls from Moab. But then tragically, we don't know the events that led to this, but tragically, Elimelech and both of his sons all die. And so now it's just Naomi and her two daughters-in-law who are left. And not sure what to do, Naomi decides to go back to her homeland, to go back to Israel. And strangely, her daughters-in-law, the girls tell her that they're just going to go with her, which kind of starts this back and forth. And we're going to read a little bit of the conversation that happened between Naomi and her daughters-in-law. So it's in Ruth chapter 1, beginning with verse 11. It says, "But Naomi replied, 'Why should you go on with me? Can I still give birth to other sons who could grow up to be your husbands? No, my daughters, return to your parents' homes, for I'm too old to marry again. And even if it were possible, and I were to get married tonight and bear sons, then what? Would you wait around for them to grow up and refuse to marry someone else? No, of course not, my daughters. Things are far more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord himself has raised his fist against me.'" I just want to stop right there. That is a great phrase. Like when life is not going, I'm going to adopt that phrase. When life doesn't go, I'm just going to be like, the Lord himself has raised his fist against me. Doesn't that sound very dramatic? This is a very dramatic moment, right? The Lord himself has raised his fist against me. She's making a pretty good case, though. The thing she's saying is making sense. Verse 14, "Again, they wept together, and Orpah, don't call me Oprah, kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung tightly to Naomi." Now you're about to get a window into the sensitive or anxious attachment style. "Look," Naomi said to her, "your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. You should do the same." But Ruth replied, "Don't ask me to leave you and to turn back. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Wherever you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord punish me severely if I allow anything but death to separate us." And when Naomi saw that Ruth was determined to go with her, she said nothing more. End of argument. What a great speech, right? This is one of the great speeches in all of the Old Testament. It's such an emotionally charged moment. And I know if you've been around church for a while, you may have heard this story. And a lot of time in churches, like this part of the story it's usually held up, like it's normalized, right? Because it's usually held up with this beautiful sort of inspirational and kind of aspirational sort of speech and relationships. And in some ways, there is some elements to it. But I think a lot of that comes because we know ultimately how the story ends up. And I mean, just take for a second, just that part, that exchange, that conversation, step back for a second. At the very least, Ruth is a little clingy, right? I mean, it even tells us that she clung physically to her mother-in-law. Her mother-in-law is like, I'm going to move. And she just like grabs on her. No, not without me. I mean, just imagine if somebody said to you, said like what she said to Naomi. If they said it to you, they're like, don't ask me to leave you ever. No matter where you go, that's where I'm going to go. Wherever you live, I'm going to live with you. I'm just going to be where you are. I won't even have people. I'll just make your people, and they'll be my people. I don't really know anything about your God, but he's your God. So that's good enough for me. I'll just make your God my God, right? Wherever you die, I vow that that's where I'm going to die. And in fact, after you're dead, and I'm going to make sure they bury us together. And you're starting to be like, this is getting creepy, right? Like, and then she says, and may God strike me down if I let anything but death tear us apart. Whew. I mean, you thought, like, you know that scene in Jerry Maguire, the "You complete me"? Like, I mean, that's a little over the top. I mean, but this is another level. Now, these words are sometimes said at weddings, but Ruth isn't saying this to her husband-to-be. She's saying this to her ex-mother-in-law. Yeah, it's kind of weird. See, sensitive attachment is the fear that saying or doing the wrong thing is just going to ruin everything. Have you ever felt that? If I just say or do the wrong thing, that's it. It's over. It's done. The irony of that is that often our anxiety over ruining everything ends up being the thing that ruins everything. Why? Because the people around us just get worn down and worn out by our constant like overanalyzing and second guessing and checking in and assuming the worst. And it's this suffocating cycle where the more we cling, the more they push us away, and the more they push us away, the more we're trying to cling to them. And maybe you know exactly what I'm talking about because you've been on one side of that equation. Now, for us today, the big question is, what does any of this have to do with us and God? Because obviously, it's possible for you to be too focused on a relationship, and that can wear us out, and it can wear the other person out. But have you ever felt like your relationship with God was exhausting? I have. I know you're not supposed to say that out loud, especially in church, but I have. I mean, sometimes it feels like there's so much just to believe and to do and to live up to, and it just feels impossible. And we know that you can get too engulfed in a relationship with another person, right? But is it possible for us to focus too much on our relationship with God? Have you ever known somebody that wasn't just a Christian? They were like an extra Christian. You know what I'm talking about? Don't look at them. There's probably somebody in this room. Right, but there's one of those people that you can't have a regular conversation with them because they're always doing like a Jesus juke in the middle of the conversation. A Jesus juke is when you're having a normal conversation, but they try to juke in some Jesus like right in the middle of it, and you're just like, whoa, that was kind of weird. Or you're just like, hey man, I'm thirsty. You thirsty? Thirsty for the Lord. You're just like, all right. Right? Or like, what'd you guys do this week? Oh man, we stayed home. We found this new show. We binge watched the whole first season. Oh, that's cool. I mean, too bad we don't binge watch the Bible like we binge watch Netflix. Okay. Or man, I went to this concert the other night and it was packed. Yeah, well, I bet if we gave out tickets to a free Jesus concert, nobody would come. And you're just like, I don't even know what that means. What's a Jesus concert? Was he in a band? If he is, I'm pretty sure he's a percussionist and he plays just the right amount of cowbell. Nobody's ever liked more cowbell. But we've all been around people like that, right? And I think part of the reason we do that kind of stuff is because we have this sensitive or anxious attachment to God. And so we're always trying to signal to ourselves and other people, and especially to God, that we're on Team Jesus. Okay, just in case you forgot, God, I'm a big fan. I'm on Team Jesus. It's you and me. Now, maybe you don't go around Jesus juking everybody, but I'm guessing you probably do know what it's like to obsess over whether or not he loves you, like for real, or whether or not he's mad at you. Because you can believe the ideas about grace and unconditional love, that those are concepts. But when you don't feel him, right, or he doesn't answer, or life isn't going the way it's supposed to go, you can't help but feel like maybe there's something wrong. Maybe there's some sin. Maybe there's some conditions that he wants from me that you're not meeting, right? Maybe there's some sin you've committed. And it gets really transactional, right? Because that's where we get mad at God. God, I've been going to church every week, and this is what you do to me. And so you start thinking, man, if I tried a little harder and did more of the right things, if I kept all the rules and avoided all the sins and believed all the right things and checked all the boxes in the theology, right? It's difficult sometimes for us, I think, to tell if it's love or fear that's driving our spiritual practices. Because on the outside, it all looks the same. On the outside, you're reading the Bible and you're worshiping and you're talking to God and you're praying, but inside, what's driving you? Jesus famously said, my yoke is easy and my burden is light, but it sure doesn't feel that way sometimes. And a lot of our church experiences aren't really that helpful either because of some of the way that we talk about things, right? Like you've probably heard some of these phrases, but we learn pretty quickly when you hang around church like that the phrase that being close to God is just kind of a shorthand way of saying that they're doing what's right and avoiding what's wrong. And so we're told to stay close to God during the week. And you're I thought God was close to me. Like, is he moving away? Do I got to try to find where he's going? If somebody does something sinful, everybody describes them as being far from God or like they're running from God. And it's not that those ideas are completely wrong, but they often lead us to really distorted and unhelpful places and thoughts about what it is like to be in relationship with Jesus. Because the message we get from those is that, well, God isn't present when you're at your worst. And so you better figure out how to pull yourself up out of that gutter because he's not going to help you. And it starts feeling like it's up to us to keep the relationship with God going, to stay connected to him. Like God likes you and approves of you when you're good, but he's disappointed and hurt and abandons you, sort of withdraws when you're bad. And so what do a lot of us do with that? Well, depends. Many of us kind of double down on all the church stuff, all the spiritual routines. So we just pray more and we read more and we give more and we serve more and we do more and more and more and more and more and more. And whether or not you do those things is not the point. The question is, why? Why are you doing them? See, I think the thing that we got to wrestle with, especially if you're wired like me, is are the spiritual things that you're doing, are they faithful devotion in response to the grace and acceptance that you've experienced? Or are they frantic effort to earn God's favor and win his approval? On the outside, it looks the same. But what's driving you is what matters. Sometimes we can't tell. Sometimes it feels like both. If I'm honest, I feel like I regularly bounce back and forth between those two. I don't want to. I want to trust God. I want to believe and live from faith and a secure attachment and security in my relationship with him instead of trying to score points with him. What's interesting is when you read the scriptures, this conversation is a huge part of what the story is about. Almost all of the rigid systems and rules and rituals that Jesus clashed with the religious leaders over, they started out really well intentioned. Most of them were the result of the frantic, sort of anxious efforts of people trying to stay connected to God. But just like happens in our relationships with one another, they had the opposite effect. The Apostle Paul wrote about this a ton. In fact, it's actually the subject of an entire book in the New Testament called Galatians. But it wasn't just the people of Galatia. It was also people in a city called Ephesus. And so Paul writes this in Ephesians chapter 2, verse 8 and 9. He says, "For it is by grace you have been saved through faith. It's not of yourselves. It's the gift of God. It's not by the things that you do. It's not by works. There's no boasting. There's no pride. Nobody can say, I did this. I kept myself close to God." See, our closeness with God is about what he does. It is not about what we do. And what he's pointing out is that God's grace and his acceptance, his love, his peace, his rest, they're gifts. They're not transactions. We often approach them like it's transactional. See, I got good news for you this morning, that God is not holding back, waiting for some cleaner, sort of better behaved version of you. He doesn't love some future version of you that because he sees the potential of what you could become. No, he loves the real time, right now, hot mess you. One of the biggest insults that was constantly being thrown at Jesus was that he was a friend of sinners. I mean, just think about that for a second. Jesus was always eating and drinking and laughing and swapping stories with people who did all kinds of things that were sinful and messed up and broken. And the religious people, they couldn't handle it. For them, that was clear and obvious proof that Jesus wasn't and could not be God. Because for them, they had a system where God lived and was present at the center of the temple. And he was only accessible by a very few, very holy people. But then Jesus shows up and he starts hanging out with people and going to parties. He starts having dinner with sinners and tax collectors and prostitutes. And he never once told any of them, like, hey, if you want to be close to me, you need to stop doing all that stuff and get your life together. Then we can hang out and have a relationship. See, when you begin to read the scriptures, what you see is that nothing can stop God from coming close to us, including and especially not sin. In fact, what you see when you read the Gospels is that when Jesus sees the brokenness, the fallenness of the world around him, his deepest impulse, his most natural instinct is to move toward that sin and suffering, not away from it. So that when you and I come to God for mercy and for love and for help in our mess and in our sinfulness, we're actually going with the flow of his deepest wishes, not against them. So does that mean God doesn't care about sin? No, it doesn't mean that. He does very much. But it does mean that perfection is not a prerequisite for a connection with God. All through the scriptures, God corrects people who have sinned and gotten off track. God lays out boundaries and even gives us rules to live by. But he never threatens to remove his love for us if we don't get it together, if we don't get it exactly right. See, there's all kinds of reasons to avoid sin in our lives. But of all the reasons we have to avoid sin in our lives, closeness with God is not one of them. Now, here's the kicker to all of this. So research actually shows that like us acting out or bad behavior or us doing like really unhealthy, broken stuff, like it increases when we're emotionally overwhelmed. And you're just like, yeah, tell me something I don't know, right? Like from stress eating to the things we drink, the things we do to our bodies, all that stuff. Like we just, if life is crashing in on you or you're emotionally overwhelmed, like you resort to stuff just like numbing and escaping and all that stuff, right? Like it's connected to that. But the research also shows that when we actually have a secure relationship to stand on, we almost always make better, wiser, healthier choices. Now, hold that thought right there, that truth, and look at what the Apostle Paul prays in Ephesians chapter 3. He says this, I pray that from his glorious, unlimited resources, he will empower you with inner strength through his Spirit. Then Christ will make his home in your hearts as you trust in him. And your roots will grow down, not into religion, not into performance, into God's love, and will keep you strong. And may you have the power to understand with all God's people as they should, how wide and how long and how high and how deep his love is. May you experience the love of Christ, though it is too great to understand fully. Then you will be made complete with all the fullness of life and the power that comes from God. See, I'm convinced that the thing that will change everything for you, the thing that will change everything for me, it's not trying harder, it's not doing more, it's not doing better, it's not getting your act together, it's not cleaning yourself up. It's Jesus making his home in you as you learn to trust in him. It's you understanding how wide and how long and how high and how deep his love is for you. Because then he says, when you get all that, when you start to stand in that place, when you start to believe that, then you will be made complete with the fullness of life and the power. Then you will experience the closeness that comes of living into a relationship with God. Growing your roots down deep into God's love, that's what will keep you strong. It's the key for all of us, especially those of us with this sensitive, anxious attachment style. Grow your roots into God's love. Stop putting your roots into all this stuff that cannot make you strong, will not make you better, will not help heal your soul. Grow your roots in God's love. Maybe put another way, and this is sort of a more practical way to look at that, is adopt practices in your life that reinforce closeness and connection with God isn't determined by your performance. Because we don't change by learning new information, but by stacking up new experiences. See, God didn't just tell us that he loves us no matter what, and he demonstrated it, right? We saw it, we touched it, we experienced it. So begin to adopt some practices that will reinforce that connection and closeness with God does not depend on your ability to perform, to jump through his hoops, to do it all right. So let me give you just a few practices that maybe you can grab onto. I hope you can read them because I had to shrink it down to fit it all on one slide. But you can memorize or meditate on scriptures about God's unconditional love. I've given you several today. You can just take the ones we talked about today. Begin to memorize those. Commit them into your memory. Maybe put a picture that illustrates that God is a friend of sinners somewhere that you'd regularly see it. Spend time around people who reflect this aspect of God, people who are calm and patient and loving. Take time each week to be with God and other people without doing anything for God and other people. Let other people see you by acknowledging your mistakes. Oh, isn't that one hard? And then maybe one of the best things you can do if you find yourself like me is that you can help other people who are like you by showing them that disappointing you is not going to destroy your relationship with you.